Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to this week's episode of the Flower Lounge. I am thrilled to have our latest guest, Karta Purkh Singh, or KP Singh Khalsa. And he is an Ayurvedic doctor and herbalist, and he's one of the country's foremost natural healing experts with over 47 years of experience in alternative medicine. KP Khalsa is the President Emeritus of the American Herbalists Guild and board member emeritus for the National Ayurvedic Medical Association. He mentored in Ayurveda with Yogi Bhajan for 32 years, and along the way, he incorporated deep studies into Western and traditional Chinese medicine. His school has been training professional Ayurvedic practitioners, nutritional therapists, and herbalists for over 30 years. KP has presented over 200 times at professional conferences, has written over 3,000 articles on health topics, and is the author or editor of 30 books on health, including his latest, The Way of Ayurvedic Herbs. He teaches Ayurveda, herbalism, and nutrition at 2 naturopathic medicine universities. KP worked as a senior research scientist and herbalist for Yogi Tea, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, for 30 years, and he holds credentials as a state-certified dietitian nutritionist. He is also naturally certified and Ayurvedic practitioner, nationally registered as an herbalist, and nationally certified as a massage therapist, as well as yoga instructor, and is the only American to hold the title Yoga Raj in Ayurveda. KP is the first person to be dual credentialed in herbalism and Ayurveda. He is extremely talented and obviously has a wealth of information that we're going to choose and pick and try and pack into this hour. So thank you so much for being with us, KP.
Oh, it's always my pleasure. Nice to be with you.
So we usually start off these podcasts with this really quick little exercise where we ask you to close your eyes and go back to a time in your childhood when you played around flowers or plants or trees, and to just think about what you were doing at the time as a kid. And if you could identify one favorite flower or botanical and 3 words that you would use to describe its personality. And whenever you're ready, if you want to share what you're thinking.
Yeah, camellia would be my favorite from my childhood. I grew up in a very sort of, industrialized time. I was born in the 50s, which was the age of, wonder drugs and wonder science and, like that post-war boom.
Right.
But I grew up in the country, so I lived in trees and flowers and in the dirt and climbing trees and everything else. But, there was no formal acknowledgement of flowers or trees. The world was to be conquered. I lived in a farming area, and the idea was to dig up as much earth as possible and, put money-bearing crops in. So we weren't encouraged to think of them in that way. But I had a great experience with a camellia bush that was growing in my yard, and every year there was a robin's nest. And so for 12 years in a row, I got to watch the life cycle of the robins, all the way those skinny little, wet birds coming out and squawking for food and all of that. So it was bold, beautiful, and colorful.
Wow. Bold, beautiful, and colorful, because what we find is that typically the words you use to describe your childhood favorite would describe the particular essence or way that you bring your gift into this world. Does that resonate?
Well, in the sense that I then found out that camellia is the tree out of which green tea is made, it kind of, ended up coming full circle.
Right. Yeah. So when you talk about being a kid in that particular time and things were meant to be conquered, what experience or practice changed your view of the world from those times?
Well, I have a typical wounded healer kind of story that I keep peeling the onion on. As you said, I've been doing this for 47 years. I'm in my 60s. And I keep delving deeper and deeper in my awareness of what motivated me to do all this. At first, it all just seemed fascinating. By the time I was a young adult, it was the hippie era, and everything was being reimagined, in a different way to live in the world. And it was a time of tremendous and rapid change. And so all these exotic new things like, yoga and meditation and different ways of diet were coming to America. So I was very fascinated by those things. But really now as an adult, I go back and realize that I think the underlying motivation was that when I was 10, I was diagnosed as having a terminal illness that slowly kills people, and nobody lives beyond 40. And when you're 10, you don't really process that very well. But I had the first symptoms, and I continued to have, it was a disease involving pain. So I had more and more pain. And by the time I was in high school, I was in pain every waking minute.
Oh.
And it was in a yoga class that I had my first 10 minutes of being pain-free when I was a teenager, that for the first time in, 17 years, or 7 years. And so I just reasoned, well, if there's one thing that can give me some relief from pain, there must be other things.
Right.
And the doctors had said there was nothing they could do. Just don't get addicted to morphine too young.
Oh my gosh.
So, I think that was really the underlying motivation, but that's long been handled. Natural medicine helped me reverse that whole thing. I'm way past 40. I haven't had any problems in that area for decades now. So it was really very fortuitous to come across these kinds of ideas. I met somebody who was dying, who was terminal with this disease, bedridden at the time and later in my life. Wow.
And had they not gone the same route that you did?
Yeah, this particular guy, he happened to be the patient of a colleague of mine, and he'd had all of his spinal nerve roots snipped to avoid the pain, and his spine was slowly degenerating, and he was just lying there in bed waiting to die. And he would die sometime shortly of, pneumonia or something like that. So a chill wind went across my forehead, but it was my very good fortune to meet my teacher and, be involved in all these new ideas that were coming to America at the time.
Right. Wow. And you certainly put in a lot of time into your expertise. So when we talk about, is there something that you want to share? Because you have such a wealth of information in Ayurveda. If you were to just say for the layperson, the basics of, this is a system that's been around for thousands of years and there's so much complexity and depth to it. But if you were to bring it into a sort of basic understanding, what would you tell us?
It's the healing side or the medical side of yoga. Yoga is the mental and spiritual development side, despite what we sort of think of yoga here as more of a system of calisthenics or something. It's actually a personal development system focusing on your mind and your spirit. Ayurveda is the medical side to help your body stay healthy while you're doing that, so you can sit up and meditate and you won't be constipated and have a headache, and you can do your yoga and meditation. So it extends into every aspect of what you could possibly imagine could be investigated for a human: diet, lifestyle, sleep, sex, herbal medicine, body work, so many things. Because to me, I learned all of it starting when I was a teenager as a complete unit. Yoga and Ayurveda had no separation for me. It was all the same thing. But I'm now realizing that most people who are interested in Ayurveda don't come from the yoga world. They come from the natural medicine world or the naturopathic world. And most people in the yoga world have very little information about Ayurveda. I've been trying to merge these for the last 40 years, but it's still challenging. So just to remember that they're not even two sides of the same coin. They're just the same coin.
Wait, just for a second, because you said something really interesting. What does it mean to you when you say yoga? Because I think it's very different from like the tight pants and the down dog. What is your definition of yoga or understanding of it?
Yeah, well, the word yoga actually means union. It comes from the same root word as the English word yoke, to yoke yourself to your own infinite consciousness. That's the idea. And the idea is just to keep evolving as a human being and be all you can be, in every way. It's not about physical feats. My teacher once said that if yoga was about flexibility, the clowns in the circus would be the most evolved people on
I love that.
But it's good to be flexible because you want to stay healthy that way. And none of us want to be like we now see our parents and grandparents, their aging process. But that's not really the emphasis. The emphasis is really on meditation. And so the whole idea is to just strip away the layers of falsehood that you've adopted through your growth period and the sort of masks that you decided you needed to be in the world, and gradually find your true self, the real core being that it is you, and then merge in that and enjoy that experience.
And how does Ayurveda tie into that?
Only in the sense that it comes from the same roots, the same philosophy, the same tradition. And so Ayurveda considers everything in our life, in our world, in our universe, to have vibrations that assist your body in healing or retard your body from healing. So every herb, for example, has a physical, mental, and a spiritual use. And so we could use herbs to enhance our concentration, our clarity, our memory, the depth of our meditation, our spiritual practice, but we could also use it for tummy aches and hemorrhoids.
Love it. I love that you talk about the vibrational quality of plants and that they have the various layers of use. Can you go more into that?
Well, yeah, many times Ayurvedic herbs even have names that are exotic or esoteric or metaphysical. For example, the main Ayurvedic cardiovascular panacea, an herb that treats everything from circulation to blood pressure to heart rhythm, is called Arjuna. And it has so many names in the sacred scriptures of India. Arjuna was Krishna, or God, the charioteer of God, and God taught this warrior to be a righteous person who fulfilled his duty no matter the consequences. It's also the same word that our word for brilliance or silver, like the French word argent for silver, Argentina, all those words come from that, bright or silver. It also means untwisted, so innocent in the heart. So it refers to your emotional heart as being open, untwisted, giving, generous, like that. All these things are together in that same concept. So when we say the name of the herb, it sets up the vibration of thinking about those states of consciousness in our being, but it also has phytochemicals that actually, enhance circulation and stabilize your blood pressure.
I love that. It's so wonderful. Yeah, I mean, as a flower essence practitioner, that's sort of all I'm looking at is the emotional, mental, spiritual. But I love that you're tying it together with the physical as well, because of course everything is connected. And I'm going to really want to dive into a topic that is of great interest to me, and that is chronic fatigue. I know you said you wrote a textbook about it, and this is something that I've, just from working so much and having a business for so many years, working with fatigue in my own life. How do we broach and how do we go into that conversation? What are herbs that can help us slowly build back our body's reserves of energy?
Sure. Well, let's talk about that a little bit because it's a multi-layered topic. And first, let's just say that chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia are the same disease, and they even have a few other different names. But it depends on the practitioner that you go to, what name you'll get. If you go to a rheumatologist, they'll call it fibromyalgia. If you go to an endocrinologist or neurologist, they'll call it chronic fatigue syndrome. But it's a complete collapse of your body's ability to control its homeostasis. Your body doesn't know when you've used up all the energy you have available and you need to stop and rest. And so you're in fight or flight panic mode all the time with high blood pressure, high heartbeat, and vigilance, and just awareness of everything around you. And it just comes from almost always some sort of a precipitating crisis event, which can be emotional. And it can be one sudden thing like an auto accident or witnessing, some traumatic event, something like that. Or it can be from some sort of a long-term grind, like being the caretaker for an aging patient or something like that. So people often develop chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia.
And just to interject here, what is the difference between chronic fatigue and fatigue that you experience, say, because your adrenals are crashed out or you're just tired over a long period of time? Because maybe I don't have chronic fatigue because I have very low blood pressure.
Well, that's right. Most people with chronic fatigue do have low blood pressure, but I'm just saying it originally came from being in a situation of some kind of stress, physical or emotional.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's an excellent question because chronic fatigue, the syndrome, does not mean being fatigued chronically.
Okay.
They're technically two different things, and the syndrome names that we gave this condition, chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, are human-made concepts where the doctors were seeing a bunch of people that either had chronic unremitting pain plus fatigue or chronic unremitting fatigue and flu-like symptoms, which is more characteristic of what you call chronic fatigue syndrome. That taking a vacation and, you go to Tahiti and lie in a hammock for 2 weeks and it doesn't get any better, then two different teams of doctors over the last 30 years came up with these ideas. And it turns out they were looking at the same thing. It's just some people had more pain and some people had more fatigue, but most people have both. And they set up a very complicated diagnostic scheme for those two diseases. The criteria are very similar, but it's very specific medical criteria that you have to meet certain parameters to be able to get the diagnosis. Most Americans are fatigued chronically. That just means that they're tired every day.
Gotcha.
And it's what you're suggesting, things like adrenal disease issues. So if we go back to the beginning of the previous century, we ask people, do you have enough energy to, when you wake up, do you feel energized enough to make it through the day? You have enough energy to have good energy throughout the day without the need for a nap, and you fall asleep comfortably at night? 95% said yes.
Mm-hmm.
Today, when we ask that question, 5% say yes.
Ooh.
We went from 95% to 5% having enough energy to just make it through their day.
Wow.
In a century. So something is obviously very wrong.
Right.
And the challenge, though, is to figure out, the smoking gun. And of course, science has been trying to do that for the last 30 years, but there is no smoking gun. It's an aggregation of all these issues with, stress, nutrition, toxic environment, and it all adds up together to people whose bodies just can't maintain their own homeostasis, and they just don't, they don't work right. They don't have enough micronutrients to build the hormones that their body needs to regulate things. They're not getting enough sleep. They're in chronic kind of low-level fight or flight. The tiger isn't going to come bursting out and attack you, but your boss is going to. Our bodies are just not wired for that. We're wired for the very occasional extreme crisis like the tiger.
Right.
You run down the path for 10 minutes until you find a tree you can climb up, and then either the tiger eats you or it goes away, and that's the end of it for another couple months. But now it's, the dashing for a plane, having meetings all day long, having your boss, tell you that your weekend you just got an assignment that's due Monday morning.
Right.
All that kind of stuff is this chronic unremitting stress, and we just don't have the setup for it. When you look at gorillas and chimps, our closest relatives, and how they live, they kind of lounge around eating leaves all day long, and they have a fight once a month, and that's about it. But we have this issue. So what you're describing is what everybody's feeling. But it's interesting because I've been in this business now 3 years, it'll be half a century. And when I first started, I didn't see this. If you asked everybody if everybody around them at work was tired every day, they would not say so. But now when I ask people, is everyone sitting at the desk in your office always tired and complaining about being tired? Yes, every single person says yes.
Wow.
So it's just a culmination of all these various issues.
Okay, so then let's dive into that. So let's talk about fatigued chronically, because this is going to affect all of us essentially, right?
That's right.
So what would you recommend for the fatigued chronically people?
Yeah, here's the problem. There is no magic bullet. It has to
Right.
be complete lifestyle makeover. And what I am discovering now is that the majority of my clients come to me and want the non-drug drug that acts like a drug, doesn't have any side effects, doesn't cost anything, and they don't actually have to take it.
The quick fix.
Yeah, and they can
Don't
work.
change my diet.
That's right. They can work into their lifestyle. Don't ask me to actually do anything, but give me, because after all, their experience has all been with a medical doctor who gives them one tiny pill a day to take. If you've seen a Lunesta tablet, you know how easy it's become now. Just a minuscule change. You can watch Netflix for 4 hours every night. You can eat crap all day long, and then you take one tiny pill and you're able to sleep. It works for a while. So they want the natural version of that, and we just don't have it. We have many tools, and they all add up, but there is no one answer. So one of the things that we've discovered is that key micronutrients in our food have decreased on average 50% in the last 50 years. And this isn't some nutty natural healing thing. This is right straight out of the USDA database. Right. So really critical things like vitamin A and magnesium are at 50%. So even if you ate a very healthy diet, the food is depleted. And then, of course, people don't eat a healthy diet. So there's that issue. And so it's not, when you talk to people about, well, how could your diet be healthier? They often don't really know. I mean, they just, I could maybe eat some fruit, I guess. I'm not too sure. But somehow we've way backed away from what grandma used to eat. And now we don't even know what would be good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the government just issued a report, it's about a month ago now, that the average American consumes less than one serving of fruits and vegetables combined per day, less than one serving. The government wants us to eat 10 servings.
Oh.
Over the past 30 years, we've tried to convince people to eat 10 and then 7 and then 5, and none of it stuck. And now we haven't even made it up to 1.
Well, and then add to that, we have like, well, now I'm, sensitive to gluten and I'm sensitive to dairy, and this is giving me inflammation and that. And so there's this sort of whole mess of what can I actually eat that's not going to upset the body.
That's right.
But I agree, more veggies and fruits is like critical, right?
Well, that's kind of the answer to everything. You know, I train nutritional therapists, and we jokingly say that the entire course could be summed up in 2 sentences: don't eat crap and eat more vegetables. And bottom line, that for most people, really, that's the core issue. So you've got that thing, you have to eat decent food, and you have to eat food that's decent. But that takes a while for it to build up those reserves. So that's more of a long-term thing. Then we have to get some sleep, which of course is challenging. No one wants to go to bed. Netflix does you the favor of going right to the next episode in 4, 3, 2, and you swear to the person's, who's comatose on the couch next to you, okay, that's the last episode. We're gonna go to bed. It's over. And then you're sitting there, 3/4 asleep, and the next one comes up. Well, just one more, and it goes on and on. People don't want to sleep, and then they can't sleep. So that's a factor. And then the other big factor that people do everywhere in the world except for North America is to use slow-acting, long-term stamina-enhancing herbal medicine that works over an extended period of time, but gives you these anti-aging effects. And everybody has figured out how to do it. Huge populations like India and China, every single person does it. It's pretty common in Europe also, but not here. So we just have never, we used to have those ideas, but they slowly bled out of natural medicine or even any kind of a Western medical approach. And so we just don't know what to do. We're scared that we're going to have an aging period like our grandparents and parents. And so we sort of want to, eat, drink, and be merry because we're going to be miserable for the last 10 years of our lives, but we don't have to be.
So what do you recommend as some protocols that would be anti-aging and the slow build and the nourishment tonics?
Yeah, every system, we call the major natural medicine systems of the world the big 3, Western, Chinese, and Ayurveda. And really, we should say the big 4, because there's also a huge system in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, that's equally as large, but we have trouble getting information out of that area of the world. So the big 4 all have systems for helping you support your long-term health with these slow-acting remedies, usually starting at puberty. And so you take a very small amount, like a gram a day of something like ginseng, everybody's heard of, and you take a small amount consistently over your entire rest of your life so that you can be robust at 80, 85, 90 and not be like our grandparents are. Usually there's one that's preferred for men, one that's preferred for women, and then another half dozen that can be taken by either gender. You just take that in modest amounts very consistently, and the difference is just huge, but it takes decades for it to just slowly permeate your system and support that and have antioxidant and immune boosting and, as you said, adrenal support effects over time.
Right. When I was traveling in Korea, I noticed that they drank a lot of ginseng tea, and there would just be these huge ginseng roots in the tea that you would just chomp down after you drank the tea.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so back to the United States. We haven't had this slow build from puberty, lifetime tonic culture. Where do we start now? I mean, I'm sure it's like start where you are now, but in what form, in what way?
Well, anything is going to be a benefit. So whatever dietary scheme people find to be appropriate, it's just got to be nutritionally dense, which means the maximum phytonutrients for the amount of calories, and that's going to be vegetables and then, some fruits. But it's got to be food that's raised appropriately, and then, any whole food is going to be of benefit compared to processed food. So stop eating processed food, eat whole natural food, of your choice, and find some dietary scheme that you resonate with and follow it, consistently. The other thing then is to pick one or two of these long-term stamina-enhancing things, ginseng I mentioned, something along that line, and begin taking that. Now, we often use these stamina-enhancing remedies, anti-aging tonics, in much larger doses initially to help people permeate their body. So ginseng would normally be taken typically only by men, but again, that's not a hard and fast rule. And not typically not started till about age 35. That one's a little bit of an exception. But people would take a gram or two every day. But if they haven't done any of this, they might take 10 grams for a day for a year or two, and then gradually transition down to a more long-term maintenance dose. So you start with a small amount. You take a few days to work your way up toward the dose that feels the best. And these act a little bit slowly, so you have to give them a little time. It might take a month or two to get this all dialed in. You take the amount that gives you the best stamina, the best sleep, the best immune fighting benefit, and continue to take that for a couple of years, and then you can gradually transition it down, and then do more like what you saw in Korea, where people use it sort of more casually. In the case of ginseng, people in Asia are real casual about it, and they throw it into soup and tea, as you said, and all kinds of different ways to cook things and food, and maybe take some pills, maybe drink some other liquid preparations. It's just sort of around, and people use it casually. That's the grandma style of things, and just they're very, very comfortable. I was doing some work in Germany the other day, and I was sitting around having dinner after work at a health food restaurant with about 10 of my colleagues, and I was sitting between a guy from Switzerland and a guy from Germany, and the German guy just said, "How can you Americans even survive without taking herbs every day?" Said, I grew up in a rural village, and everybody in my village, my parents, all my aunties, everybody I knew, everybody from school, was taking herbs every day, and they started at birth and did it forever, and that's what kept them healthy. Why are you not doing it? So even a place as familiar to us as a place like Switzerland and Germany,
right,
people are doing this, and they're using anti-aging remedies consistently over time. So instead of a sick care system where you wait till you're busted and then try to replace the part or fix yourself in a crisis, you prevent the problems by using these just common sense anti-aging remedies.
And what would be the equivalent for women that ginseng is to men?
Yeah, dongquai would be the one in Chinese medicine. That's the usual one for women, and that one is especially good at building healthy blood. So because women have monthly blood loss for half their life, they tend to be a little bit more likely to have to need more blood building things, but it's very similar across the board. And again, you can just take a couple of grams a day in capsule form or whatever, starting at puberty. And if a woman is 50 years old and she's never done that, she could take 10 grams a day for a year and then work her way back down. The Ayurvedic pair that would be equivalent to that would be ashwagandha for men. Again, not limited to men, but typically it works a little bit better for men. Ashwagandha was named the herb of the year by the health food industry this year. It just really got a name for itself and really took off this year. For me, it was the 45-year overnight sensation, but it's gratifying to see that these things are finally catching on.
I love it. One we haven't heard of so much that hasn't made a debut yet here in the West, but what do you think of Shatavari? Would that be similar to an ashwagandha for men, Shatavari for women?
That's right, yeah. And the name Shatavari means 100 husbands, again, a nod to its sexual benefit. So yeah, women would take that in modest amounts. Again, if a woman starts at puberty, a gram a day, 2 grams a day, every day. These are all very food-like. Ashwagandha is basically like a root of a tomato plant. Shatavari is the root of a type of asparagus. They're very food-like you experience the ginseng in Korea. Dongquai is like a carrot, basically. So these are concentrated food-like remedies that you take consistently over time. I was talking to a friend of mine in India who's about 55, and she just said where she grew up, it would be just no one would even think of the possibility of a woman not taking Shatavari every day. And she said on the day of a woman's first period, when she's 12 years old, grandma comes in with some Shatavari and says, okay, you're going to take this every day for the rest of your life, just like I do. And that's how they get introduced to it. And she just said no one would think of not taking it. Wow. So it's part of the lifestyle. Wow. So we just have to reinstitute those ideas that you're going to take some kind, like people here would take a multiple vitamin, you're going to take an anti-aging tonic remedy every day forever.
That's really amazing. And so when you're taking it in such low doses over a long period of time as a tonic, you wouldn't need to worry so much, or would you just observe your own body in terms of dosage of tweaking out one of your doshas. So like, let's say you took a lot of ginseng and you feel yourself getting really hot and irritable, you would know that you've got too much pitta. And I know we haven't gone into the 3 doshas at all in this conversation, but are these herbs that you can use without a lot of, precision to looking at the effects that they're having on your dosha? Or should we also be aware of how they're adjusting our elements, so to
Well,
speak?
with all these things, there are, levels to their use. So most cultures have worked out some kind of a 3-tiered system where you have, grandma herbalism, and every grandma knows 10 or 12 herbs and 10 different ways to use each of these herbs. That takes care of 90% of the problems that people have, from constipation to headache to insomnia. And grandma knows a little bit about a few things.
Right.
And handles everything. And then the next level is the clan herbalist, who learned from her grandmother, and she has a repertoire of maybe 100 herbs, and she knows several ways to use them, and she handles the things that grandma can't handle, and she takes care of maybe 8% of things. And then the professionally trained practitioner, the doctor level, whether they trained by legacy like I did or academically, are called upon to handle the serious issues that are beyond the first 2 levels, and they handle maybe 2% of the problems. So it's a much more reasonable system where the economy can handle it, people can handle the expense. Here we take the most highly trained professionals in our society and pay them high amounts of money to treat boo-boos and tummy aches.
Right.
It's just silly, medical doctors with umpteen layers of school, and you pay $1,000 an hour, to treat something that grandma would handle. Professionals typically have a repertoire of about 2,000 herbs, and they know many ways to use them. So these can be used in a grandma way, like ginseng or dong quai, very casually in soup or whatever, and that way has worked for thousands of years. And you use very kind of mild, neutral remedies. And then, as you go up the scale, you start to get into more aggressive doses and things that treat symptoms better or are more penetrating to the body. And then you have to have a little bit more training. Ginseng is a little bit of an exception because it's hotter than most of those other ones. It promotes a higher metabolic rate, as you said, turns up the heat in your body a little bit. So that one you might want to just be careful not to use huge amounts. Although, again, you could go to a county fair in Korea and find people eating deep-fried ginseng on a stick as a snack. Like we'd have deep-fried Twinkies on a stick at the county fair, and they have deep-fried ginseng on a stick. So it's not rocket science. It doesn't have to be that complicated, but that's one example. But ashwagandha, shatavari are pretty neutral, and you can use tablespoons a day and probably not notice any kind of side effects or issues. Generally, we do use some of these herbs to treat acute symptoms. Dong quai can promote a menstrual period, for example, if a woman is late. It's not the best for that, but it might do that. Shatavari is great for hot flashes. It's a cooling herb, and so you get up into the range of more like 15, 20 grams, and it can shut off hot flashes overnight.
Okay, so while we're on the topic of herbs, can we talk a little bit about Gotu Kola? What can you tell us about Gotu Kola?
One of my favorite herbs. I recommend it several times a week. It just really delivers. So it's a flimsy little salad vegetable in the parsley family. If you think of it as being spinach, you'll know how to use it. And you can cook with it. Anything you could do with spinach, you can make pureed Gotu Kola. You can use it, steam it as a vegetable. It's widely used as a food herb all across from South India clear over to the Philippines. It's a tropical plant, grows in the brutal heat and moisture, so irrigation ditches and lakes and things like that. It's has 2 outstanding characteristics. The first one is as a nerve herb, so it treats anything having to do with nerve tissue damage, crushing injuries to the nerve disorders, multiple sclerosis, viruses that live in the nerves, things like that. And it also then has benefit cognition, memory, awareness, treating dementia, those sorts of things. So it's that whole brain and nerve situation. Best brain herb in the world from my perspective. The other thing is that it treats connective tissue disorders. Connective tissue is the structural tissue that we're made of, which is things like skin, muscles, and bones. So it helps to knit back together any kind of corrupt connective tissue, fractures, sprains, strains, rashes, eczema, scars, things like that. The thing people need to remember about Gotu Kola is that it's a very, very mild herb, and people often take way too little.
Mm.
The standard dose is about 30 grams of the dried material, and you just steep that as a tea, steep it for an hour or more, and strain it out, and then drink that. And it takes a while to do the job, although sort of depending on how tuned in you are to your own cognitive processes, some people who are used to meditating will notice a bump in just a day or two. But most people, it'll take a matter of a few weeks, that kind of a dose, to start to realize that they're not forgetting their car keys and that kind of thing. Very, very effective. I use it for some of the most serious things. You know, my specialty is neurology, so I spend my days treating epilepsy and autism and migraines and things like that. And it's just so good for those things. You pick almost any brain disorder, brain and nerve disorder, multiple sclerosis, and give a high dose of Gotu Kola, and over the months and weeks, you just see a tremendous benefit.
What's a story that, can you tell any stories from your personal, professional experience of Gotu Kola?
Well, yeah, here's an example having to do with connective tissue. We use it to reverse scars, and which is something that most people think can't be done, but I've done it myself. I'll tell you two stories about it, one involving me. So when I was a teenager, I had a motorcycle, and like all teenagers do, I had an accident in the gravel. And when the dust cleared, I still had my legs wrapped around the motorcycle, but I was on my side, and I smelled some cooking flesh, and I realized that it was the motorcycle engine branding itself into my leg.
Oh my goodness.
So I ended up with a motorcycle brand in my leg, which then healed up, and it wasn't any big deal, and I kind of forgot about it. And then after using substantial doses of Gotu Kola,
mm-hmm.
it completely disappeared. It slowly dissolved and just went away.
How many years later?
The thing was, I was doing so many experimental things at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It was really hard to know exactly, what dose did what. I mean, it was probably...
But I mean, it wasn't like you started taking Gotu Kola right after your accident, right? It was some time later.
That's correct. And so I'd had the scar for probably 5, 6, 7 years before I started the Gotu Kola. And then it was again, maybe 3 or 4 years after that I kind of woke up and realized, hey, wait a minute. You know how you're so familiar with your own body, you don't even sort of look at that kind of stuff anymore, And I kind of looked down in the shower and went, whoa, wait a minute. What happened to that scar? But I had the most dramatic case was a teenage girl. She was 16, and she wanted to wear a bikini to the beach. And it was already that summer, so it was too late. But I said, okay, how about for next summer? So she used a similar dose of Gotu Kola, maybe we used a little higher dose, and she took it. She was the most compliant patient ever, totally motivated. But she had
a huge scar in her belly?
Yeah, a gnarly scar, big lumpy scar going from her pelvis down to her knee, right where the bikini would reveal it.
Yeah.
When she was a kid, she'd fallen out of a tree onto a stub of another tree and just ripped her thigh open.
Oof.
Bone, and they, patched it back up. But she had this great big gnarly jagged scar, and before our eyes, as we slowly watched it over the course of a year, it just faded away, and body remolded all that tissue and made it into beautiful new tissue, completely gone.
Wow.
She wore a bikini to the beach the next year.
That's fascinating. That's incredible. What about an herb, Bacopa?
Yeah, Bacopa is very similar. It's also a water plant. It's about probably twice the potency of Gotu Kola, and so the dose would be about half. It only has the cognitive enhancing benefit. It doesn't have the structural healing benefit, so you wouldn't use it for scars or fractures. But it does improve cognition. Both of these have a lot of science behind them. They're both very well validated. They're used in Ayurveda for kids to improve their, test scores, and for adults to treat dementia, and for people just as a brain support throughout life so that they don't lose cognitive ability and memory. Bacopa does not have a food use. It's considerably more bitter than Gotu Kola, so you really couldn't cook it into soup. It'd be pretty nasty. So people just take it as, you can take it as tea. I mean, you can gulp it down and it's okay, but otherwise you take it in capsules or stir the powder into a bite of mushy food and swallow it, something like that.
Mm. And are there any other tonic herbs that you can think of? I mean, even something as simple as ginger or the spices that are in chai, any tonics that you feel like Americans or people in general should be trying to work into their diet more often?
Well, culinary spices, most of which are warming, are a big area that can provide tremendous benefit, and we tend to be a low spice culture, so our food tends to be quite bland, and people are not used to mainly warming spices. You mentioned ginger, cloves, cumin, cinnamon, that sort of thing that people use pretty much everywhere else in the world. It doesn't have to be, those are all tropical spices. It doesn't have to be tropical spices, but even culinary herbs from the Mediterranean, like the mints, tarragon, oregano, thyme, those are all full of essential oils that promote good digestion. So just being very aware of your digestion and making sure that your food gets well and completely digested in your stomach, exits your stomach quickly and in the appropriate amount of time, then just goes through its cycle and gets out of your body, quickly and appropriately. So that's one area. The ginger is a great example of a fantastic grandma medicine. In Ayurveda, it's called the universal medicine, and the scriptures literally say, if you can't cure it with ginger, don't even bother.
Oh.
So it treats 1,000 things, but the thing is, it's not the best herb for any of those things. So it's a great herb to include consistently in your diet every single day for the rest of your life. With a couple exceptions, it's not a great herb to do much of anything acutely. Mm-hmm. And that's true of those, the rest of those herbs. Other kinds of tonic herbs are long-term stamina-enhancing anti-aging herbs. There's a Chinese herb called Cotinopsis. It's called poor person's ginseng. It's very similar in action to ginseng, but it's not a connoisseur herb. Ginseng is the most famous herb in the world, and the price reflects that. So even though if you just take a gram or two a day, the price is not onerous, but still on a per pound basis, ginseng is expensive. Cotinopsis is much less expensive. It's less potent, so the dose has to be higher, but it's quite edible. So you can cook it into your food and just have it be in your stew. Then if you cook it into your food, you could actually just eat the flesh. It's pretty decent tasting once it's rehydrated, or you can make tea out of it or take it as powder. So that's an example of an herb that's similar to things like ginseng and ashwagandha that we mentioned, but it's not connoisseur and has a long-term sustaining benefit. Let me mention another one from Ayurveda. It's an herb that few people have heard of yet, called Guduchi, Guduchi, Guduchi. It's rapidly becoming one of my favorite herbs. It's definitely in my top 5. It does so many things, and there are 3 herbs in Ayurveda that are said to have the divine cosmic energy infused into them, and that's one of the 3. So it's considered to be the best herb in the world, or in the Ayurvedic system, for cleansing the energy channels of the brain and mind. So for people who want to have clear thinking, good cognition, exalted mood, all of those things, it's great. But on a more pedestrian level, it's used to treat the flu. So people grow a Guduchi plant. It's a climbing vine. You just grow it on a stake, or on a trellis. And people go out and grab a hunk of it and just make tea out of it for their kids when they come down with a snotty nose and headache, and it just knocks the flu just like that.
Wow.
So you've got something that has a really basic physical use like that, and then a much more exalted emotional and spiritual use.
And can you find it? How do you find it here in the U.S.?
Easily available. If you just take that spelling that I gave you and Google it, you'll come right to it. It's easily available.
Okay. And because I know we have some people in our community with headaches, what do you recommend for headaches and migraines?
Yeah, there are many types of headaches, and migraine is a specific area. There's a couple of herbs I could mention that are likely to be absolutely 100% effective. The first is an herb called Feverfew. It's a little daisy, and it has a constituent in it that will suppress migraines about 99.9% of the time. I'd say 100, but then you wouldn't believe me. So the vast majority of the time, you could find some dose of Feverfew that if you take it every day, you just never have another migraine ever. As far as we know, it's not curative. It's only preventive. So, as a healer, that's not a great long-term outcome for me, is that you have to take an herb every day to not have a headache. Migraines are 99.9% curable. So I'd rather see people eventually cure it. But you could take Feverfew forever. And the dose is anywhere from 0.5 gram to highest dose I've ever given was 8 grams. But it's pretty much absolutely guaranteed. It takes maybe 10 days to kind of saturate your body and kick in. But once you've got a good reserve in your body, you take that consistent dose every day. And you just work up to the dose, which when you take it, you never have another migraine.
Since you know so much about the brain, why the heck do we get migraines? So if a migraine is such a much more intense sort of headache, I used to get them when I was a kid. why do we get migraines in the first place, as opposed to just a headache?
Well, this is one of my favorite topics, and the answer is a little complicated, so let's see if we can narrow it down. It's the loss of the brain's ability to maintain its own homeostasis, and it just creates an electrical storm. Somehow the brain loses the ability to regulate literally the electrical signals in its brain. It starts almost always in the back of the head. And then it slowly moves forward, and it's like a cyclone that the body is, the further it goes, the less like the body is to handle it. And it's usually triggered by something. It might be a food or humidity or stress, but the brain is trying to process 1,000 things at once, and it just sort of blows a fuse. We now know that epilepsy and migraine are the same thing. So an epileptic seizure is a type of migraine, or a migraine headache is a type of seizure, either way you want to look at it. That's now well established. So the classic migraine, where you have pain on one side of your head, you have an aura, and then you have visual disturbances. Turns out that that's maybe 20% of actual migraines, and it's just a complete disruption of whatever area is being affected. So sometimes people get weird smells or hear weird sounds. It's like a seizure without the muscle movement. So now people are starting to call that disease migrolepsy or epilepigraine or something like that, because it's really all the same thing. And it turns out, we've known this for 20 years, that the same drugs affect both of them. So we get realizing more and more, and now the science has validated, the electrical storm. So in the case of migraine, there's about 8 good theories about what actually happens, and they all have some evidence, but something happens to cause the brain to send extra blood to the area where it perceives there's a problem. And then it realizes, I sent too much blood, there's too much vasodilation, so now then it responds and over constricts the vessels.
Right.
And half the scientists think that the pain is from the constriction and half from the dilation, so we don't really know, but we know that happens. So somehow we have to control that, and it turns out that Feverfew, as I mentioned, we don't know how Feverfew works, which is very effective. But ginger, which you mentioned, is the one area that ginger really stands out, is to abort a migraine. Pretty much the only thing that will abort a migraine. Just in class the other day, we had a situation where the woman sitting right in front of me was starting to kind of turn green. I said, gosh, what's going on? She said, I got a migraine coming. We happened to be in a place where there was a dispensary. So I just said, go right to the dispensary and get them to give you 2 heaping tablespoons of ginger powder, stir it into a glass of water, drink it down immediately, and, rest for a few minutes and come back. And she came back about 20 minutes later and said, it aborted it absolutely. It just receded like it was nothing. And I feel completely normal now. And she made it through the rest of the day with no symptoms. And then the next morning, how did it go? No recurrence. It just aborted it.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
100% of the time as a way to abort a migraine. So sometimes people can take modest amounts of ginger, and I would say the maximum amount that your tummy can tolerate every day as a prevention. It's not as good as the Feverfew, but that works on balancing the circulation in your head so that your body is less likely to have that boomerang effect of the extreme dilation and the extreme constriction.
Wow. Everyone should know these things. Ginger is so easy to get your hands on.
Yeah, I just tell people that suffer from migraines. Again, I try to convince them to get into an ongoing program to cure the migraine. That's going to take about a year, probably. We just have to gradually readjust the homeostasis of the body so that the body is not on the edge of that triggering crisis every minute and just, goes over the edge. So that's a slow but steady process, pretty much 100%. We basically nailed that. But in the meantime, people can carry around just a little bag of ginger powder. There's always some water around someplace, and you can mix up like that woman did and slug it down, and then it aborts it.
Right. Wow, that is so fascinating. And I know we're almost running out of time, but there's one last little question I want to ask you that's unrelated to herbs, but it's about Abhyanga, self-massage. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about why that could be such a nice self-healing ritual for people these days.
I'm such a fan of it. So this is self-massage, and the idea comes from Ayurveda, and you're going to massage yourself with some kind of oil appropriate to your particular body energies. It might be a base oil like sesame. I use mustard, which is appropriate to my body. Or it might be an infused oil, a medicated oil that has herbs in it. And it takes 5 minutes, and you just smear this all over your body. And the purpose is to get is not to have a bodywork experience, but to get this medicine to go into your body so that it gets absorbed into your tissues, and it feeds the energy and the phytochemistry of your various tissues. It's something that when people first hear about it, it just seems ludicrous. I mean, why would smearing oil on myself early in the morning for 5 minutes make any difference? And then people who elect to try it often will come back 6 months later and say, I'll never give it up. I've been doing it for 47 years. I carry oil with me when I travel so I can do it. I'm just a great fan of it. A little hard to explain why, what's so good about it, but everybody who tries it just sticks with it. And all the students, everybody's reluctant to try it because it's one more thing and it's messy,
Mm-hmm.
Then they try it. Speaking of books, I just finished a book that is a kind of a fish out of water experience of a woman who was a hard-charging marketing executive. And we got together and had her live in a yoga ashram for a year while I treated her Ayurvedically, and she wrote about her experience. Anyway, she writes in the book about similarly, it's like, what could this possibly do? And then by the end of the year, it was like, amazing results. So it's a slow and steady experience. You're not going to feel any different the first day you do it or the first week you do it. But over time, you begin to realize, gosh, my skin feels better. My joints are feeling better. I have more energy earlier in the day. It's a kind of indefinable, but a really great feeling.
Well, it's really good for also like emotional mental health too. I mean, besides like the cracking joints, kind of like adding lubrication to your joints and your skin, it's also can be, depending on your dosha, really calming or revitalizing or stimulating, right?
Yeah, this idea that from Ayurveda that you have certain master metabolic energies in your body that control everything. Ayurveda is all about that, the doshas that you mentioned earlier. So Ayurveda would say we need to do long-term, slow-acting, sustained, consistent things to keep those metabolic forces in check, and that's what stabilizes your mental function and all those things that you mentioned. So we're not doing it for a specific disease; we're doing it as an overall benefit, and it turns out to be one of those beneficial things you can do to keep those doshas in balance. People with cold, dry bodies often use castor oil, really messy but very effective. People with hot inflammatory type bodies often use coconut oil, and then people with colder wet bodies like mine use a warming lighter oil like mustard.
And then what would be the oil you would recommend if you don't know your dosha?
Sesame is the kind of universal tridoshic oil that pretty much works for everybody.
So, okay, so you wake up in the morning and either before or after your shower, you just apply the oil to your whole body.
Most people do it before the shower because then they can wash off the residue. We want it to stay on your body as long as possible. And the official Ayurvedic instruction is to do it after your shower so that it can sink into your tissues. But you have to walk around oily for a little while. Most people who are involved in Ayurveda do yoga, so they're going to go do their yoga and they just put on their oily yoga clothes and go for it. And by the time you're done, it sinks in. You can kind of scrub it off anyway. Many people take another shower after their yoga because they got sweaty doing the yoga.
Right. Wow, there's so much meaty stuff to dive into here, and I so appreciate your time, KP. I know you're really busy, and I wanted to mention that for the listeners, he has offered so graciously a free webinar called the 10 Essential Ayurvedic Herbs that we will pop up on the page for this podcast. And I'm just so incredibly grateful that you made time to be here. Thank you so much, KP. Is there any other last little nugget of wisdom or thing that you find yourself telling people lately that we should know?
Do something. That's the bottom line. Every journey begins with the first step, and just any step is going to help kind of sort of crack the egg on whatever you're doing. There's always something you can do to help yourself be a little bit more balanced, feel a little bit better. And it just, often people find that the task seems so enormous, they don't know where to start. So just start with something. Add a new vegetable every week. Exercise for 5 minutes. Just do something to get the momentum started, and you'll be surprised at how easy it is to then do the next thing.
I love it. Wow. Thank you so much, KP.
Always my pleasure. Nice to hear from you.
This episode is sponsored by Aromaculture Magazine, an educational magazine about herbs and essential oils. Each issue of the magazine is packed with articles, case studies, and recipes written by practicing herbalists and certified aromatherapists. The current April issue centers around my favorite topic, flower essences, and energetics. Subscribers who choose to receive the magazine automatically each month also receive a bonus herbal reference sheet with every issue. Save 20% on all past issues of Aromaculture magazine by entering the coupon code FLOWERPOWER, all one word, at the checkout throughout the month of April. Visit aromaculture.com and click on the magazine for more info. Thank you so much for listening to The Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.